This family gave me everything my pathetic real family never did. My daughter Sarah announced to 300 wedding guests, her voice carrying across the crystal chandeliers and silk-draped tables. I smiled and quietly pulled out my phone, typing a single text message that would change everything in the next 60 seconds. What happened next would haunt Sarah's perfect wedding reception for the rest of her privileged life. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I should probably explain how we got to this moment, but honestly, watching my only daughter publicly humiliate me at her own wedding reception while wearing the $15,000 dress I secretly paid for was just the final insult in a 22-year parade of them. Sarah stood there in her designer gown, champagne flute raised high, addressing the crowd like she was accepting an Academy Award. "The Williams family taught me what real love looks like," she continued, her voice dripping with emotion that I knew was completely genuine. She meant every word. "They showed me what it means to have parents who actually support their children's dreams instead of crushing them." The guests murmured appreciatively. A few even glanced in my direction with those sympathetic looks people give when they think they're witnessing someone being gently corrected rather than publicly destroyed. Mrs. Williams, Sarah's new mother-in-law, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Mr. Williams nodded proudly from his seat at the head table. David, my new son-in-law, stood beside Sarah with his arm around her waist, looking uncomfortable for the first time all evening. "Mom always said I was too demanding," Sarah laughed, and the crowd chuckled along. "Too expensive, too complicated, too much work. But the Williams family? They invested in me. They believed in me. They made me feel worthy of love." My phone buzzed. Message delivered. I could have stood up right then and left. I could have made some excuse about feeling tired or needing air. That would have been the dignified thing to do. But after 68 years on this earth and 46 years of motherhood, I was fresh out of dignity. Instead, I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor of the country club ballroom. The sound cut through Sarah's speech like a knife, and suddenly, all eyes were on me. "Don't let me interrupt, sweetheart," I said, my voice carrying just far enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Please, continue telling everyone how terrible I am." Sarah's face flushed red. "Mom, that's not what I—" "Oh, but it is exactly what you meant." I picked up my purse and my wrap. "And you know what? You're absolutely right. I was a terrible mother. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your dance lessons instead of just writing a check like the Williams family would have. I saved every penny for your college tuition instead of taking those European vacations you wanted. I bought generic groceries so you could have name-brand clothes. Absolutely pathetic of me." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Sarah stared straight at me, her expression shifting from embarrassment to something colder. "You know what, Mom? This is the perfect time for you to go." That's when David, my brand new son-in-law, who had barely spoken to me all evening, stepped forward and said 5 words that made every single person in that ballroom gasp. "She paid for this entire wedding." The sound that rippled through the ballroom wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a murmur. It was something closer to the collective intake of breath that happens when a magician reveals how they sawed the lady in half. Except this trick wasn't entertaining anyone. Sarah's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the crystal exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces that glittered under the chandeliers like her carefully constructed lies. "David, what are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, everyone heard it. I should probably back up and explain how we got here, because the story of how my daughter came to hate me enough to publicly humiliate me at her own wedding reception is a masterclass in how good intentions can pave the road to absolute hell. 22 years ago, when Sarah was 20 and home from college for spring break, she came to me crying because her roommate's family had invited the whole dorm to their ski house in Aspen for the week. "All my friends are going, Mom," she sobbed. "But I can't afford it. I'm the only one who has to work summers while everyone else gets to travel and have fun." I was a single mother then. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 15, leaving us with his life insurance and not much else. I was working as a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm, making just enough to cover our mortgage and Sarah's college expenses, with nothing left over for ski trips to Aspen. But looking at my daughter's tear-streaked face, remembering how she'd always been the responsible one, the one who studied while her friends partied, the one who worked weekends at the campus bookstore to help with expenses, I made a decision that would haunt our relationship for the next 2 decades. I took out a second mortgage on our house, $5,000 for 1 week in Aspen. It seemed like such a small amount to give my daughter the same opportunities her wealthier classmates took for granted. She was so grateful, so happy. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as she graduated and got a real job. Of course, she never did pay me back. Not because she couldn't, but because somehow, over the years, that loan transformed in her mind from something she owed me into something I had freely given her. And if I had freely given her $5,000 once, well, then I could certainly do it again. The ski trip led to a summer abroad. The summer abroad led to graduate school. Graduate school led to the deposit on her first apartment in the city. Each time, Sarah would come to me with tears in her eyes and a perfectly reasonable explanation for why she needed money right now and why she couldn't ask anyone else. "I can't ask Tom's parents for help," she'd say about her boyfriend's senior year. "His family already thinks I'm just after their money." Or, "My boss said this certification program is the only way I'll get promoted, but the deadline for registration is tomorrow and I don't have the $3,000. By the time Sarah met David Williams at a charity gala 3 years ago, I had refinanced my house twice and taken out a personal loan against my retirement savings. But I was proud of her. She had a master's degree, a successful career in marketing, and she'd finally found a man who seemed to adore her. The Williams family welcomed Sarah with open arms from the very beginning. David's parents, Charles and Patricia Williams, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast. They had old money, the kind that came with trust funds and summer houses, and the sort of casual confidence that only comes from never having to check your bank balance before making a purchase. Within 6 months of dating David, Sarah was spending holidays with the Williams family. Within a year, she was calling Patricia Mom and Charles Dad. I told myself it was sweet that she'd found a second family to love her. I told myself it didn't hurt that she started declining my invitations to Sunday dinner because the Williams family had season tickets to the symphony. I was still telling myself it didn't hurt when Sarah called me last year to tell me she was engaged and that Patricia Williams was helping her plan the wedding of her dreams. "It's going to be at the Grandview Country Club, Mom," she gushed over the phone. "Can you believe it? Patricia knows the event coordinator personally. They're giving us the full wedding package for $75,000. My heart stopped. $75,000? I know it sounds like a lot, but David's family has connections everywhere. The flowers alone would normally cost $15,000, but Patricia's friend owns the florist shop. And the photographer is Patricia's cousin. It's going to be perfect." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed. "I'm so happy for you." What I didn't say was that I had exactly $837 in my checking account and a credit card that was maxed out from Sarah's last emergency. What I didn't say was that my retirement savings were already gone, spent on her graduate school and her apartment deposits and her career development courses and 100 other investments in her future that she'd somehow forgotten I'd made. "The only thing is," Sarah continued, "David's family is being so generous with everything else. I feel weird asking them to cover the whole wedding. I want to contribute something myself, you know? To show them I'm not just marrying David for his family's money." "Of course," I said. "That's very thoughtful of you." So I was thinking, maybe I could cover the venue fee. It's only $25,000, and I have some savings, but not quite enough. Could you help me out? Just this once? For my wedding? Just this once. As if the previous 22 years of just this once had never happened. But what was I supposed to say? "No, I won't help pay for your wedding"? Let David's family think I didn't care enough about my own daughter to contribute to her special day? So I said yes. Of course I said yes. I took out a home equity loan for $30,000. $25,000 for the venue, $5,000 as a cushion for any additional expenses that might come up. Because there are always additional expenses. Like the $10,000 dress Sarah fell in love with that wasn't quite in her budget. Like the $1,500 shoes that were the only ones that would work with the dress. Like the custom jewelry she simply had to have to complete the look. By the time David spoke those 5 words that made the entire ballroom gasp, I was in debt for the first time in my life, with a home equity loan that would take me 7 years to pay off on my fixed income. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that somehow, in Sarah's mind, all of that money had come from the Williams family. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could see Sarah's mind racing, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to make David's revelation fit into the narrative she'd constructed about her generous adoptive family and her neglectful real mother. "What David means," she finally said, her voice artificially bright, "is that Mom contributed to the wedding costs, along with David's family. It was a team effort." David turned to look at his bride with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No, Sarah, that's not what I mean." I had to give him credit. For a man who'd barely acknowledged my existence for the past 3 years, he was certainly finding his voice at the most dramatic possible moment. "Your mother didn't contribute to the wedding costs," David continued, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. "She paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the music, the food, the bar, everything." Patricia Williams stood up abruptly from the head table, her face white as her son's dress shirt. "David, what are you talking about? We discussed the budget months ago. Your father and I—" "You discussed planning the wedding," David interrupted. "Mrs. Patterson paid for it. Now let me tell you something about the Williams family that Sarah never quite understood, despite spending 3 years trying to earn their approval. They weren't actually wealthy, not in the way Sarah thought they were. Oh, they were comfortable enough. Charles Williams owned 2 hotels, not a chain. Nice hotels, boutique properties in Vermont and New Hampshire that catered to leaf peepers and ski tourists. They did well during peak seasons and struggled during the off-seasons, like most small business owners in the hospitality industry. The house Sarah loved so much, the one where she spent every holiday and most weekends, it belonged to Charles's mother, who was 93 and had been talking about selling it for the past 5 years. The cars, the club memberships, the season tickets to the symphony, all carefully managed to create an impression of wealth that was about 60% real and 40% smoke and mirrors. I knew this because I wasn't 22 and starry-eyed like my daughter. I was 68 and had been managing money, other people's money, for most of my adult life. I knew how to read between the lines when Charles Williams casually mentioned that business had been challenging lately, or when Patricia sighed about having to scale back their vacation plans. More importantly, I knew how to listen to the things people didn't say. When Sarah started gushing about how the Williams family was taking care of everything for the wedding, I paid attention. When she mentioned that Patricia was coordinating with all the vendors, I made some phone calls. It took exactly 3 phone calls to learn that no deposits had been made, no contracts had been signed, and no payments had been arranged for any aspect of Sarah's dream wedding. The Williams family was planning a beautiful wedding for their son. They just weren't planning to pay for it. I could have told Sarah. I could have sat her down and explained that her future in-laws were expecting her to cover the costs of the wedding they were so enthusiastically planning. But I knew my daughter well enough to know exactly how that conversation would go. She would have been devastated. She would have cried about how humiliating it would be to scale back the wedding plans after Patricia had already sent invitations to half of New England's social register. She would have worried about what David's family would think of her if she couldn't afford the kind of wedding they considered appropriate for their son. And then she would have asked me to help her, just this once, for her wedding, because she couldn't possibly ask David's family to contribute more than they already had. So I skipped the middle part and went straight to the solution. I called the Grandview Country Club and paid the deposit myself. I called the florist and the photographer and the caterer and the musicians, and I paid all of them myself. I told myself I was protecting Sarah's dignity. I told myself I was ensuring she got the wedding she'd always dreamed of. I told myself that someday, when she and David were settled and successful, she'd understand what I'd done and why I'd done it. What I didn't tell myself, because I'm not completely naive, was that there was a very good chance Sarah would never know what I'd done, that she would go through her entire marriage believing that her generous in-laws had given her a fairy tale wedding while her own mother had contributed nothing but criticism and complaints. I made peace with that possibility because I loved my daughter more than I loved being credited for my sacrifices. But apparently, David Williams was more honest than I'd given him credit for. "Mrs. Patterson," David said, turning to address me directly for the first time all evening, "I owe you an apology. When I learned the truth about who was paying for today, I should have said something sooner. I should have insisted that Sarah acknowledge your generosity properly. Sarah was looking back and forth between her new husband and me, like she was watching a tennis match in slow motion. What truth? David, what are you talking about? Your parents planned this whole wedding. My parents planned the wedding, David agreed. Your mother paid for it, all of it. The total cost was $87,000. That number hung in the air like smoke from a fire that's just been extinguished. I watched Sarah's face as she processed what David had said, watched her mental calculations as she tried to figure out how I could possibly have that kind of money. Because she knew, better than anyone, that I'd been living on a fixed income since I retired 5 years ago. She knew I'd downsized to a smaller house. She knew I drove a 10-year-old Honda and bought generic groceries and hadn't taken a vacation in longer than she could remember. What she didn't know was that all of those economies had been necessary to pay for her life. That's impossible, Sarah said finally. Mom doesn't have that kind of money. She does now that she's taken out a home equity loan, David replied quietly. And that's when I realized that my new son-in-law knew a lot more about my financial situation than he'd ever let on. The look on Sarah's face was something I'd never seen before, not in 42 years of being her mother. It wasn't surprise or gratitude or even embarrassment. It was something closer to betrayal, as if I'd committed some unforgivable crime by secretly funding her perfect wedding. "You took out a loan?" she whispered, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Mom, why would you do that?" And there it was, the question I'd been dreading for 3 years, ever since I'd first started covering Sarah's expenses with money I didn't actually have. Not, "Thank you," or "I had no idea," or "I'm so sorry you've been struggling financially because of me." Just, why would you do that? As if my actions were somehow an imposition on her life rather than a gift. "I did it because you're my daughter," I said simply, "and because you wanted this wedding." "But I never asked you to go into debt for me," Sarah protested, and I could see her rewriting history in real time. "I would never have wanted you to take out a loan. You should have told me you couldn't afford it." Patricia Williams had been growing paler by the minute, and she finally found her voice. "Margaret, we had no idea. We never would have accepted such generosity if we'd known the burden it would place on you." "What burden?" Sarah snapped, turning on her new mother-in-law with surprising venom. "Mom made her own choices. No one forced her to pay for anything." I watched Patricia Williams' face carefully as Sarah spoke, and I saw something there that made my heart sink. It was the look of someone who was finally seeing my daughter clearly for the first time, and not particularly liking what they saw. "Sarah," David said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." "No," Sarah said, her voice rising enough to carry to the far corners of the ballroom. "I'm tired of private conversations. I'm tired of secrets. Mom, if you couldn't afford to pay for my wedding, you should have said so from the beginning instead of making me look like a fool. Making her look like a fool. Not making yourself struggle financially or sacrificing your security for my happiness. Making her look like a fool. How exactly do you look like a fool?" I asked, and for the first time all evening I heard the edge in my own voice. "Because people found out your mother loves you enough to pay for your dream wedding? Because everyone thinks I'm some spoiled brat who doesn't appreciate what she has," Sarah shot back. "Because you've made it look like I've been taking advantage of you all these years." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "Haven't you?" The voice came from somewhere behind me, and I turned to see David's sister Emma, who was sitting with her husband at table 12. "Been taking advantage of her, I mean?" Sarah's face went crimson. "Excuse me?" Emma shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she'd just thrown a grenade into an already explosive situation. "I'm just saying, David told me your mom has been supporting you financially for years. The apartment deposits, the graduate school, the career development courses, and now an $87,000 wedding that she paid for with a home equity loan. If my mother had done that for me, I'd be thanking her, not complaining about how she made me look." "You don't understand the situation," Sarah said tightly. "Then explain it to me," Emma replied. Explain how a 68-year-old woman going into debt to pay for her daughter's dream wedding is anything other than an incredibly generous sacrifice that deserves gratitude, not public humiliation. We offered 700,000, Sarah said quietly, as if the extra 50,000 were somehow less shocking when whispered. $700,000. I repeated the number slowly, letting it sink in. For a house. It's a seller's market, Sarah said defensively, and the location is perfect. Close to David's family, good school district for when we have children. And how exactly were you planning to afford a $700,000 house? I asked. Sarah glanced at David, then back at me. We have savings, and David has a good job. And we thought, she trailed off. You thought I'd give you the down payment, I finished for her. Not give, Sarah said quickly. Help with, as an investment in our future. Families help each other with major purchases like homes. Some families do, I agreed. Families that have money to spare. Patricia Williams, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Margaret, we feel terrible about this misunderstanding. If we'd known that Sarah was counting on your financial support without discussing it with you first, we never would have encouraged such ambitious plans. What do you mean, encouraged? Sarah turned toward her mother-in-law with a sharpness that made me wince. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Well, dear, when you and David were house hunting, you did mention that you had family resources to help with the purchase. We assumed you'd had those conversations with your mother. I don't need to ask permission to plan my own future, Sarah snapped. You do when it involves other people's money, Emma interjected from table 12. She seemed to be enjoying this drama entirely too much, but I had to admit, I was grateful for her bluntness. David cleared his throat. Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. About the fertility treatments. Oh, dear Lord. It was going to get worse. What about the fertility treatments? Sarah asked, though I could tell from her voice that she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. The consultation appointment we scheduled for next month. The doctor's office called yesterday to confirm our payment plan for the initial round of treatments. $15,000 due before we begin. Sarah's face went gray. You told them we'd pay $15,000? I told them we'd pay $15,000 because you assured me your mother would cover medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance, David replied. You said she'd already told you she wanted to help us start a family. I stared at my daughter in complete bewilderment. When did I tell you that? You didn't explicitly say it, Sarah admitted. But when we talked about David and me having children, you seemed excited about becoming a grandmother. I assumed that meant you'd want to help make it happen. I am excited about becoming a grandmother, I said slowly. That doesn't mean I have $15,000 to spend on fertility treatments. But if you really wanted grandchildren, Sarah began. If I really wanted grandchildren, what? I'd go further into debt to pay for medical procedures for a daughter who just spent 10 minutes publicly explaining to 300 people how inadequate I am as a mother. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Sarah realizing that she might have burned a bridge she was still planning to cross. Mom, I didn't mean... You meant every word, I interrupted. And that's fine. You're entitled to your feelings about me and about how I raised you. But you're not entitled to my money to fund a lifestyle you can't afford while simultaneously explaining to everyone how disappointing I am. Charles Williams had been conspicuously silent throughout this entire conversation, but he finally spoke up. Perhaps, he said diplomatically, we should all take a step back and remember that this is Sarah and David's wedding day. Whatever issues need to be resolved can surely be discussed privately at a more appropriate time. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I think this is exactly the right time to discuss it. Sarah has made her feelings about me and my role in her life very clear, and I think David deserves to understand the financial reality he's marrying into. I turned to address David directly. Your wife believes she's entitled to financial support from a woman she considers inadequate and pathetic. She's made financial commitments on your behalf based on money she doesn't have and never bothered to ask for. She's planned a lifestyle that requires ongoing subsidies from someone she publicly humiliates. Does that sound like a sustainable arrangement to you? David looked from me to Sarah and back again. Mrs. Patterson, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said, because Sarah never told you the truth about our financial arrangement. She let you believe I was wealthy and stingy instead of struggling and generous. She let you plan a future based on resources that don't exist. That's not fair, Sarah protested. You never told me you were struggling. You never said you couldn't afford to help me. When? I asked. When should I have told you? When you were crying about the ski trip, or when you were panicking about graduate school, or when you were excited about your dream wedding? When exactly should I have sat you down and explained that helping you was requiring me to sacrifice my financial security? Sarah had no answer for that, because we both knew there had never been a good time for that conversation. There had only been crisis after crisis, each one urgent enough to require immediate financial assistance and emotionally charged enough to make practical discussions about my limitations feel cruel and selfish. But I was done feeling cruel and selfish for having limitations. David, I said, turning back to my new son-in-law, let me be very clear about something. I love my daughter. I want her to be happy, but I cannot and will not continue to fund a lifestyle I can't afford for someone who treats me like an embarrassment. Mom, Sarah said, her voice smaller now, I never meant to. Yes, you did, I said gently. You meant every word you said tonight, and that's okay. You're a grown woman, and you're entitled to your opinions about me, but you're not entitled to my financial support while holding those opinions. I picked up my purse and stood up from the table for what I now realized would be the last time. Congratulations on your marriage, I said to David. I hope you'll be very happy together, and I hope you'll both learn to live within your means. And then I walked out of my daughter's wedding reception, leaving behind not just the party, but 22 years of financial obligation to someone who had never appreciated the sacrifice. For the first time in decades, I felt free. I made it exactly halfway across the country club parking lot before I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was before David's voice called out, "Mrs. Patterson, please wait." I stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. The August evening was warm and humid, the kind of night where the air felt thick enough to swim through. In the distance, I could hear the string quartet resuming their performance, as if nothing had happened. As if my entire relationship with my daughter hadn't just imploded in front of 300 witnesses. "Mrs. Patterson?" David's voice was closer now, uncertain. I turned around to find him standing about 10 feet away, his bow tie undone and his perfect hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger somehow, less polished than the confident groom who'd walked down the aisle 6 hours earlier. "What can I do for you, David?" I asked, and I was pleased to hear that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. He took a few steps closer, stopping just outside what felt like polite conversation distance. I wanted to apologize. For all of it. For not knowing, for not asking, for letting Sarah make assumptions about your financial situation without verifying them. "You don't need to apologize to me," I said. "You're not responsible for your wife's relationship with money or with me." "Wife." He said the word like he was testing it out, seeing how it fit. "That's going to take some getting used to." I studied his face in the parking lot lighting, trying to read his expression. "Are you having second thoughts?" He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that I could hear the distant sound of laughter from the reception and the closer sound of cicadas in the oak trees that lined the country club driveway. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. How long has this been going on? The financial support, I mean." I considered lying, or at least softening the truth. But David had been honest enough to expose the reality of who had paid for this wedding, even though it would have been easier for him to stay quiet. I owed him the same honesty. 22 years, I said, since her junior year of college. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected something like that but hoped he was wrong. "And in all that time she's never paid you back? Never offered to help you financially?" "She's never been in a position to help me financially," I said. "Every time she gets ahead, there's always another expense, another opportunity, another crisis that requires immediate funding. Funded by you. Funded by me." David sat down heavily on the decorative stone wall that bordered the parking lot, and I was struck by how exhausted he looked. "Mrs. Patterson, can I tell you something that's going to sound terrible? I think we've moved past worrying about how things sound, don't you?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been having doubts about Sarah for months, about her relationship with money, about her expectations for our future, about the way she talks about you." That last part caught my attention. "How does she talk about me? Like you're a burden she's been forced to carry instead of a mother who sacrificed for her happiness." He looked up at me with an expression that might have been respect. I never understood why she seemed so resentful of you when you've been nothing but supportive of her dreams. Now, I'm starting to realize that the support was more literal than I knew. David, can I ask you something? Fair trade. Why did you say what you said in there? About who paid for the wedding? You could have stayed quiet and let Sarah continue believing her version of events. He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. Because I realized that if I let her humiliate you publicly without saying anything, I'd be complicit in it. And because I needed to know the truth about our financial future before we started building a life together. And now that you know? Now I know that the woman I married has been living a lie for over 20 years, and she's expected me to participate in that lie without telling me what I was signing up for. He looked up at me again. Mrs. Patterson, I make a good salary, but I'm not wealthy. I can't afford a $700,000 house and fertility treatments and the kind of lifestyle Sarah thinks we're going to have. And I can't ask my parents to cover the difference, because they don't have that kind of money either. What are you going to do? I don't know, he admitted. Cancel the house offer, obviously. Have some very difficult conversations about expectations and reality. Figure out if there's a marriage worth saving underneath all the financial delusions. I felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy for my daughter. Whatever mistakes she'd made, whatever selfishness she'd displayed, she was about to face some very harsh realities about the life she'd constructed and the assumptions she'd built it on. David, can I give you some unsolicited advice? Please, don't make any major decisions tonight. This has been emotional and public and humiliating for everyone involved. Give yourself some time to process what happened before you decide what comes next. He nodded. That's good advice. Thank you. And David, whatever you decide about your marriage, I hope you'll remember that Sarah isn't entirely at fault here. I enabled her expectations by never setting clear boundaries about what I could and couldn't afford. I made it easy for her to take my financial support for granted because I never wanted her to worry about money the way I did when I was her age. You're very generous with someone who just humiliated you in front of 300 people. I shrugged. She's still my daughter. That doesn't change just because she hurt my feelings. David stood up from the stone wall and straightened his jacket. I should get back inside. People will be wondering where the groom went. David? Yes? For what it's worth, I think you're a good man. I hope you and Sarah can figure this out. He smiled, and for the first time all evening, it looked genuine. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. And for what it's worth, I think Sarah is very lucky to have a mother like you. I just hope she realizes it before it's too late. As I watched him walk back toward the country club, I found myself hoping the same thing. But I also found myself realizing that whether Sarah figured it out or not, I was done waiting for her to appreciate what I'd given her. It was time to start living for myself. The valet brought my car around, and as I drove away from the Grandview Country Club, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 hours earlier. I was done being my daughter's personal bank account. Whatever came next, I was going to face it with my financial independence intact. Even if that meant my relationship with Sarah didn't survive the transition. Some prices, I realized, were simply too high to pay, even for love. I thought I'd have at least a few days of peace before Sarah came crawling back, but I should have known better. My daughter had never been one to let pride stand between her and something she wanted, and apparently what she wanted now was damage control. The phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 8. Voicemail again. By 9 o'clock, I'd received 6 calls, 4 text messages, and what appeared to be a handwritten note slipped under my front door. The note was vintage Sarah, dramatic, manipulative, and completely focused on her own feelings rather than anyone else's. Mom, I'm devastated by what happened last night. I never meant to hurt you. Please call me so we can talk this through. I love you so much, and I can't bear the thought of you being angry with me. We're family, and family forgives each other. Love, Sarah. I read it twice, looking for any acknowledgement of what she'd actually done wrong, any recognition of the 22 years of financial sacrifice she'd just dismissed as pathetic, any understanding of why I might be more than just angry. There was none. The phone rang again at 9:15. This time, I answered. Hello, Sarah. Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Are you okay? You left so suddenly last night, and I was worried about you driving when you were upset. I had to give her credit for strategy. Lead with concern for my well-being. As if that had been her primary worry after publicly humiliating me at her wedding reception. I'm fine, Sarah. I got home safely. Good, good. Listen, Mom, I think we need to talk about what happened last night. There were some misunderstandings, and I want to clear the air. Misunderstandings. That's what she was calling it. What misunderstandings? I asked. Well, for starters, I had no idea you'd taken out a loan to pay for the wedding. If I'd known you were struggling financially, I never would have accepted such a generous gift. A generous gift. Not a sacrifice I'd made because she'd led me to believe she needed help covering her portion of the wedding costs. A generous gift that I'd apparently chosen to give her without any prompting or request on her part. Sarah, I said calmly, you specifically asked me to help you cover the venue fee so that you could contribute something to the wedding costs yourself. I know, but I meant help like a few $1,000s. Not $87,000. You should have told me you were planning to pay for everything. You're right, I said. I should have told you that the Williams family wasn't actually paying for anything, and that if you wanted the wedding you'd been planning, someone would need to cover the full cost. There was a pause. What do you mean the Williams family wasn't paying for anything? I mean they never made any deposits, never signed any contracts, never arranged any payments. They planned your wedding, but they weren't paying for it. Another pause, longer this time. That's not possible. Patricia coordinated everything with the vendors. Coordinating isn't the same as paying. Sweetheart, I called every vendor on your list 3 months ago. None of them had received any payments or even payment arrangements from anyone in the Williams family. But David's parents said they were taking care of everything. They said they were taking care of the planning. You assumed they meant the payments. I could hear Sarah's breathing on the other end of the line, and I could practically see her recalculating the entire foundation of her wedding arrangements. Mom, are you saying that David's family knew you were paying for everything? I'm saying that David knew, I replied. And David told me yesterday that he tried to discuss the financial arrangements with his parents multiple times, but they kept redirecting the conversation back to the planning details. Why didn't anyone tell me? I think the better question is why you didn't ask. You've been planning this wedding for 8 months. You had to sign contracts, approve payments, make changes to orders. Did you never wonder why you weren't being asked to provide payment information? Sarah was quiet for so long, I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she said, I thought Patricia was handling all of that. With what money, Sarah? I don't know. I assumed they had money. Based on what? Based on their house, their lifestyle, the way they live. Their house belongs to David's grandmother. Their lifestyle consists of careful budgeting and strategic social positioning. They're comfortable, but they're not wealthy. I know this because, unlike you, I asked questions before making financial commitments. I could hear Sarah starting to cry, and part of me felt bad for destroying her illusions so systematically. But another part of me, the part that had been paying for those illusions for 22 years, felt like it was about time she faced reality. Mom, I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, Sarah. You're inexperienced with money because I've always handled financial problems for you. But inexperience stops being an excuse when you're 42 years old and planning a life with someone else. I know. You're right. But Mom, what am I going to do now? David is talking about canceling the house offer, postponing the fertility treatments, changing all our plans for the future. And there it was. The real reason for the phone call. Not guilt about what she'd said to me, not gratitude for what I'd sacrificed, not concern for my financial well-being. She was calling because David was forcing her to face the reality of their actual financial situation, and she needed me to fix it. What are you asking me, Sarah? I'm asking if maybe we could work something out. A loan, or a payment plan, or something. Just until David and I get on our feet financially. To pay for what? The house down payment. Maybe some of the fertility treatment costs. Just the essentials. Essentials. A $700,000 house and $15,000 fertility treatments were essentials. Sarah, I took out a home equity loan to pay for your wedding. I'm 68 years old, and I now have a mortgage payment that will take me 7 years to pay off on my fixed income. I don't have any more money to loan you. But Mom, the house is such a good investment. And the fertility treatments are time-sensitive. If we wait too long, it might be too late for us to have children. Then maybe you should have had this conversation with me before you started making commitments you couldn't afford. I know, but we can't change that now. What matters is moving forward, finding a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone, meaning a solution that allows Sarah to keep the lifestyle she wants while I figure out how to pay for it. Sarah, let me ask you something. After everything that happened last night, after the way you spoke about me in front of 300 people, why do you think I would want to continue supporting you financially? Because you're my mother, she said, as if that explained everything. And because you love me, and because family helps each other. Family helps each other. From the woman who had just spent her wedding reception explaining to everyone how pathetic her real family was compared to her adopted one. You're right, I said. Family does help each other. But Sarah, what have you done to help me? The question seemed to catch her completely off guard. What do you mean? I mean, in 22 years of me helping you financially, what have you ever done to help me? Have you ever offered to pay for my groceries when money was tight? Have you ever helped with my utility bills, or my car repairs, or my medical expenses? Have you ever even asked if I needed help with anything? Silence. Sarah, I didn't know you needed help. You never said anything. I never said anything because every time we talked, you had a crisis that needed immediate financial attention. There was never space in our conversations for my problems because your problems always took priority. But Mom, if you'd told me you were struggling, you would have what? Given up your apartment to help me with my mortgage? Skipped your vacation to help me pay for my car repairs? Chosen a smaller wedding so I wouldn't have to go into debt? Another long silence. That's what I thought, I said. Sarah, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done funding a lifestyle for someone who sees me as a pathetic embarrassment. You want to keep the house offer and the fertility treatments and all the plans you've made? Find another way to pay for them. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't punish me for one bad night. I'm not punishing you. Sarah, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. And for the first time in 22 years, I hung up on my daughter. I should have known that hanging up on Sarah wouldn't be the end of it. My daughter had never met a closed door she couldn't find a way to force open, and apparently, my newfound financial boundaries were just another obstacle to overcome. The next assault came from David, which surprised me. I'd gotten the impression from our parking lot conversation that he was having his own crisis of faith about his marriage, but apparently, married life was already teaching him the fine art of diplomatic pressure. He called Tuesday evening, just as I was settling in with a cup of tea and the book I'd been trying to finish for 3 months. His voice was careful, measured, like someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. Mrs. Patterson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, David. How are you adjusting to married life? It's been educational, he said, and I heard something in his tone that might have been dark humor. Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to call and apologize again for what happened at the reception, and to thank you for the advice about not making any major decisions while emotions were running high. You're welcome. Have you and Sarah had a chance to talk through everything? We have, extensively. He paused. Mrs. Patterson, I wonder if I could ask you something, and I want you to know that I'm asking for myself, not because Sarah asked me to call you. I doubted that was entirely true, but I appreciated the attempt at diplomacy. Go ahead. When you and I talked in the parking lot, you mentioned that you'd enabled Sarah's expectations by never setting clear boundaries about what you could and couldn't afford. I've been thinking about that, and I'm wondering if maybe there's a way to set those boundaries now, in a way that works for everyone. Here it comes, I thought. The reasonable, rational proposal that would somehow allow Sarah to keep all her expensive plans while making me feel like I was being consulted rather than manipulated. What did you have in mind? Well, Sarah and I have been looking at our finances more realistically, and we've realized that we may have been overly ambitious with some of our plans. We're willing to scale back significantly, but there are a few expenses that are time-sensitive, such as the fertility treatments, primarily. Sarah is 42, and our doctor has advised us that waiting another year could significantly reduce our chances of success. We're not asking for the full $15,000. We found a clinic that offers a payment plan that would require a down payment of $5,000, with the rest spread over 18 months. $5,000. Just $5,000 for the chance to give Sarah the family she'd always wanted. It sounded so reasonable when he put it like that. And the house? We're withdrawing our offer on the Morrison place. You're absolutely right that it was beyond our means. We found a smaller place, a townhouse, that's much more affordable. We can handle the mortgage payments ourselves, but we'd need help with the down payment. $10,000. $10,000 for the house, $5,000 for the fertility treatments, $15,000 total, still less than I'd spent on Sarah's wedding dress and shoes. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? You and Sarah are both employed, both educated, both capable adults. Why is your financial plan dependent on a 68-year-old woman on a fixed income? He was quiet for a moment. Because we've been living beyond our means for longer than we realized. And we've made commitments based on assumptions that turned out to be wrong. That's honest. But it doesn't answer my question. Why is your solution to ask me to bail you out instead of finding a way to live within the means you actually have? Because we don't have time to save $15,000. By the time we could save that amount, it might be too late for Sarah to have children. And if I say no, another pause. Then we'll figure something else out. But Mrs. Patterson, I'm hoping you'll consider this as an investment in Sarah's happiness and in your relationship with her. There it was. The subtle threat wrapped in a reasonable request. Give us the money, or Sarah will be unhappy and blame you for ruining her chances at motherhood and home ownership. David, let me make sure I understand what you're asking. You want me to give you $15,000 on top of the $87,000 I just spent on your wedding so that you and Sarah can have the house and the family you want on the timeline you want. We'd pay you back, he said quickly. With interest. We could formalize it as a loan if that would make you more comfortable. Like the loan Sarah was supposed to pay me back for her ski trip 22 years ago, or the loan for her graduate school, or the loan for her apartment deposits. Silence. David, I'm going to tell you something that Sarah apparently never shared with you. In 22 years of loaning your wife money, she has never, not once, paid me back a single dollar. Not because she couldn't, but because every loan magically became a gift in her mind. This would be different, David said. We'd put it in writing. We'd set up automatic payments. Why would this be different? Because I'd be involved. Because I understand the importance of honoring financial obligations. I had to give him credit for trying, but I'd seen this movie too many times to believe the ending would be any different. David, let me tell you what would happen if I gave you $15,000. For the first few months, maybe the first year, you'd make the payments. But then something would come up. Sarah would lose her job, or one of you would have medical expenses, or there would be some other crisis that made the loan payments impossible. And because I'm family, because I love Sarah, because I want what's best for my daughter and my future grandchildren, I'd agree to defer the payments temporarily. Mrs. Patterson, and then the temporary deferment would become permanent because there would always be another crisis, another reason why this wasn't a good time to restart the payments. And eventually, the loan would become another gift that I'd given because I wanted Sarah to be happy. That wouldn't happen. It's happened every time for 22 years. Why would this time be different? David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, less rehearsed. Because I really do love your daughter, and I really do want our marriage to work. And I'm starting to understand that it won't work if we keep expecting other people to solve our financial problems. Then solve them yourselves. How? The same way millions of other couples do. Live within your means. Save up for what you want. Wait until you can afford things before you buy them. Make sacrifices in some areas so you can prioritize others. But the fertility treatments, David, if you can't afford to have children, you're not ready to have children. Kids are expensive. If you need me to loan you money to get pregnant, how are you going to pay for diapers and doctor visits and childcare and everything else that comes with parenthood? I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, and I could tell he was trying to find another angle, another way to make this sound reasonable. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah is really struggling with this. She feels like you're punishing her for what she said at the wedding. I'm not punishing her. I'm declining to reward her. She's afraid you don't love her anymore. David, I will always love my daughter, but I've finally realized that love doesn't require me to bankrupt myself to fund her dreams. She wants to see you, to apologize properly and work things out. She can apologize anytime she wants, but if she's hoping the apology will come with a check, she's going to be disappointed. David sighed. I understand. And honestly, Mrs. Patterson, I think you're probably right. About all of it. We need to learn to live within our means. And we need to stop expecting you to solve our problems. I'm glad you understand. But Mrs. Patterson, can I ask one more favor? Here we go, I thought. What's that? Will you at least consider having dinner with us? Not to talk about money, just to talk. Sarah is my wife now, and you're her mother. And I'd like for us to find a way to have a relationship that isn't based on financial obligations. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain my boundaries and protect myself from further manipulation. But another part of me, the part that still remembered holding my baby daughter for the first time, wasn't quite ready to give up entirely. All right, I said, dinner. But David, if this turns into another pitch for money, I'm leaving. Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, wondering if I was making a mistake. But I'd spent 42 years being Sarah's mother. I wasn't quite ready to stop, even if the terms of engagement were about to change dramatically. The dinner was scheduled for Friday night at 7 o'clock at a restaurant called Romano's that I'd never heard of, but that Sarah assured me was casual and comfortable. When I arrived, I understood why she'd chosen it. Romano's was the kind of place where entrees cost $45 and the wine list started at $15 a glass. Casual and comfortable, if you were comfortable spending $100 on dinner for two. Sarah and David were already seated at a corner table, and I could tell from Sarah's body language that she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were red-rimmed, despite obvious attempts to cover the evidence with makeup, and she had that fragile look she'd always gotten as a child when she was trying very hard not to cry again. "Mom," she said, standing up to hug me. "Thank you so much for coming." "Of course, sweetheart." I hugged her back, noting that she felt thinner than she had at the wedding. Stress, probably. David stood and pulled out my chair, which was more courtesy than he'd shown me in 3 years of dating my daughter. "Mrs. Patterson, you look lovely." "Thank you." I sat down and glanced at the menu, trying not to wince at the prices. "This is a nice place." "Sarah picked it," David said. "She thought you'd enjoy the atmosphere." What I enjoyed was the fact that Sarah had apparently forgotten that I'd raised her to be considerate of other people's budgets when choosing restaurants. But then again, Sarah had been forgetting a lot of things about how she'd been raised lately. "So," I said, settling into my seat, "how was the honeymoon planning? I know you were hoping to go to Europe." Sarah and David exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "We've decided to postpone the honeymoon," Sarah said. "Just temporarily, until we get some other things sorted out." "Financial things?" I asked. "Among others," David replied diplomatically. The waiter appeared and asked if we'd like to start with drinks. David ordered wine for himself and Sarah, and I asked for water with lemon. When the waiter left, Sarah leaned forward. "Mom, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the phone call kind." "I'm listening." What I said at the wedding reception was inexcusable. I was trying to be grateful to David's family for welcoming me, and I ended up making it sound like you'd never done anything for me. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. It was a better apology than I'd expected, but I could tell there was more coming. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I've never helped you financially, and you're right. I never asked if you needed help, never offered to contribute to your expenses, never even considered that you might be struggling. Go on. I guess I always assumed you were fine. You never complained about money, never acted like you couldn't afford things. You just handled everything. So I thought you could afford to handle everything. And now? Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. Now I realize that you were sacrificing your own financial security to give me opportunities you never had. And instead of appreciating that, I took it for granted. It was a good apology. It hit all the right notes, acknowledged the right problems, demonstrated the right understanding of what had gone wrong. But something about it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. I appreciate the apology, Sarah. I really do. But I'm wondering what you want to do with that understanding going forward. Sarah glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. I want to find a way to make things right between us, to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of assumptions. That sounds good. What would that look like? Well, for starters, I want to pay you back. Not everything all at once, because honestly, we can't afford that right now. But something every month, even if it's just a small amount. I want to start acknowledging the debt I owe you. I stared at my daughter, trying to figure out if this was genuine or just another manipulation tactic. How much do you think you owe me, Sarah? She pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. I've been trying to remember everything. The ski trip, graduate school, the apartment deposits, the wedding. I think it's somewhere around $200,000. $237,000, I said. I have the receipts. Sarah's face went pale. $237,000? Give or take a few hundred. Jesus, David muttered. I know it's a lot, Sarah said quickly. I know we can't pay it back quickly, but if we could pay you $500 a month, every month, it would take— She paused to calculate. A really long time. 39 years, I said. If you paid $500 a month with no interest, it would take you 39 years to pay me back. The waiter returned to take our dinner orders, which provided a welcome break in the conversation. I ordered the cheapest entree on the menu, while Sarah and David ordered items that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. When the waiter left, David cleared his throat. Mrs. Patterson, we've been thinking about this situation from a different angle. Here it comes, I thought. What if instead of trying to pay you back in cash, we found a way for you to benefit from our financial recovery? Like an investment in our future that would pay dividends over time? What kind of investment? Well, if you could help us with the down payment on the townhouse, you could be a part owner. When we sell it eventually, you'd get your investment back, plus a share of any appreciation. And the fertility treatments? Think of them as an investment in your legacy, your grandchildren. I stared at David for a long moment. Let me make sure I understand. You want me to give you more money on top of the $237,000 I've already given Sarah, and you're framing this as an investment opportunity for me. When you put it like that, it sounds bad, Sarah said. But Mom, we're trying to find a way to include you in our success instead of just taking from you. Sarah, you're 42 years old. David, you're 45. You're both educated, employed adults. The fact that you need a 68-year-old woman to invest in your future should tell you something about the viability of that future. That's not fair, Sarah protested. Lots of families help each other with major purchases. Lots of families have money to spare, I replied. I don't. But Mom, if we don't act soon, we might miss our chance to have children. And if we don't buy a house now, prices might go up even more. Sarah, those are choices you have to make based on your own resources, not mine. The food arrived, and we ate in tense silence for a few minutes. Finally, Sarah put down her fork and looked at me with an expression I remembered from her childhood, when she was about to play her final card in an argument. Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago. I braced myself. I'm scared, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I don't have children soon, I'll never have them. I'm scared that David will leave me if I can't give him a family. I'm scared that I've messed up my life so badly that I'll end up alone. It was emotional manipulation at its finest, but it was also probably true. Sarah had always been terrified of being alone, of not measuring up, of not having the life she thought she deserved. Sarah, I said gently, those are real fears, and I understand them, but they're not my responsibility to fix. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face now. I know they're not your responsibility, but you're my mother, and I don't have anyone else to turn to. You have a husband. David can't solve this by himself. He doesn't have the resources. Then maybe the solution isn't to find someone who does have the resources. Maybe the solution is to accept that you can't have everything you want exactly when you want it. Sarah stared at me like I'd suggested she cut off her arm. But Mom, this is my chance. Maybe my only chance. Maybe. Or maybe you'll find other chances, other solutions, other ways to build the life you want. But Sarah, I can't keep sacrificing my financial security for your chances. What if I promise to pay you back? Really promise, with a contract and everything. You promised to pay me back for the ski trip 22 years ago. This is different. How? Because I'm different. Because I understand now what I didn't understand then. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, desperate woman who was still, at 42, asking me to fix her problems, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not resentment, but something closer to sadness. Sarah, I said, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done being your solution to problems you need to solve yourself. Mom, please. No. I stood up and put my napkin on the table. I'm done, Sarah. Find another way. And for the second time in a week, I walked away from my daughter, knowing that this time I wasn't coming back. I thought walking away from Sarah at Romano's would be the end of it. I thought I'd finally made my position clear enough that even my persistent daughter would accept defeat. I should have known better. Sarah had never been good at accepting defeat, especially when the stakes were this high. And apparently, when direct appeals to maternal guilt didn't work, she was willing to escalate to tactics I never would have expected from my own child. The call came on Monday morning from my bank. Jennifer Morrison, the branch manager I'd worked with for 15 years, sounded confused and apologetic. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm calling about some unusual activity on your home equity line of credit. We've received a request to increase the credit limit, along with documentation that appeared to be signed by you. But the signature doesn't quite match what we have on file, and the request was submitted online rather than in person, which seemed unusual for you." My heart started racing before she'd finished the sentence. "What kind of request?" "A request to increase your current line of credit from $30,000 to $75,000. The application included copies of income verification and a signed authorization form." "I didn't submit any request," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "I would never increase my credit limit. That's what I suspected. Mrs. Patterson, I hate to ask this, but do you have any idea who might have access to your personal financial information?" I did have an idea, and it made me sick to my stomach. "Jennifer, I'm coming in right now. Don't process any requests related to my accounts until I get there. Of course, I'll flag everything and have our fraud specialist available to meet with you." I was dressed and in my car within 10 minutes, my hands shaking as I drove to the bank. The fraud specialist, a young man named Marcus Chen, walked me through the application that had been submitted in my name. It was good, very good. The signature was close enough to mine that if I hadn't been looking for discrepancies, I might have missed them. The income verification was authentic, copies of my actual Social Security statements and pension documentation. The authorization form was formatted exactly like the bank's official documents. "Mrs. Patterson, whoever did this had access to very detailed financial information about you," Marcus explained. "Bank account numbers, Social Security number, income sources, your original home equity loan documents. This level of access typically comes from family members or people who handle your finances. What happens now? We've frozen the account and rejected the application. We'll file a fraud report with the police and with the credit bureaus. But Mrs. Patterson, we need to discuss the possibility that this might not be the only attempt. Whoever did this might try again with other institutions." Jennifer leaned forward. "Mrs. Patterson, do you have any idea who might have done this?" I stared at the forged signature on the application, noting how the M in Margaret was just slightly different from my usual style, how the P in Patterson was a little too perfectly formed. And I realized that Sarah had been watching me sign documents for her entire life. She'd seen me sign permission slips and loan applications and tax forms and birthday cards. She knew my signature well enough to forge it convincingly. "I have an idea," I said, "but I need to confirm it before I make any accusations." I drove home in a fog of disbelief and growing anger. My own daughter had tried to forge my signature to increase my debt limit without my knowledge. The same daughter who'd been crying at Romano's about how scared she was, how sorry she was, how much she loved me. I sat in my kitchen and called David's cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Patterson, is everything okay?" "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course. Did you know that Sarah tried to forge my signature to increase my credit limit?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "David, Mrs. Patterson, I can explain." "Please do." "Sarah panicked after dinner on Friday. She felt like you were never going to help us, and she was desperate. She said she knew your financial information because she'd helped you with paperwork over the years, and she thought maybe she could just get us the money we needed and then pay it back before you ever found out. You knew about this and you didn't stop her?" I told her it was a bad idea. I told her it was fraud, but she was so upset, so convinced that this was our only option that I didn't think she'd actually go through with it. But she did go through with it. Apparently. "Mrs. Patterson, I am so sorry. I should have stopped her. I should have called you and warned you." "Yes, you should have." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down enough to think clearly. "David, where is Sarah right now? She's at work. Mrs. Patterson, she doesn't know that you know. She's been checking her email obsessively, waiting to hear back from the bank about the credit increase. I see. What are you going to do? I'm going to call the police and file a fraud report. And then I'm going to have a conversation with my daughter about the consequences of forging legal documents. Mrs. Patterson, please. I know what she did was wrong, but she was desperate. She wasn't thinking clearly. David, she committed a crime. She forged my signature on legal documents to steal money from me. The fact that she was desperate doesn't make it less illegal. If you call the police, she could be arrested. She could lose her job. Then she should have thought about that before she decided to commit fraud. Mrs. Patterson, I'm begging you, please don't destroy her life over this. Let me talk to her. Let me make her understand how serious this is. It's too late for that, David. She crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. What if she agreed to pay you back? Everything, with interest. What if we signed a legal contract? With what money? You just told me you're both so desperate for cash that you thought fraud was a reasonable option. We'll figure something out. We'll sell things, take second jobs, whatever it takes. I almost laughed at the irony. David was finally talking about the kind of sacrifices and lifestyle changes that should have been their first option instead of their last resort. But it was too late for reasonable solutions. David, I'm done negotiating with people who think I'm a target rather than a person. Sarah made her choice when she decided to forge my signature. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Mrs. Patterson, please. Tell Sarah that the bank caught her fraud attempt and that I'm filing a police report this afternoon. Tell her that if she wants to discuss this with me, she can call me through her lawyer. I hung up before David could respond. And then I called the police department's non-emergency line to report the fraud. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but matter-of-fact. Fraud was fraud, regardless of family relationships. They would investigate, and if they found sufficient evidence, they would file charges. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 22 years of dealing with Sarah's crises. Complete and utter clarity. My daughter was not a victim of circumstances or bad luck or financial pressure. She was a 42-year-old woman who had chosen to commit a crime rather than accept the word no from someone she'd been manipulating for over 2 decades. And I was done being her victim. The arrest happened on a Wednesday. I know this because Detective Rodriguez called me at 9:30 in the morning to let me know they'd taken Sarah into custody at her office. Professional courtesy, he called it, since I was the victim and I'd been cooperative during their investigation. She's being charged with identity theft and attempted fraud, he explained. Both felonies. Her attorney will probably try to work out a plea agreement, but that's between them and the district attorney's office. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in my kitchen trying to process the fact that my daughter was in jail because of something I'd set in motion. It should have felt terrible. It should have felt like the worst moment of my 68 years. Instead, it felt like relief. The phone rang an hour later, David's name on the caller ID. Mrs. Patterson, they arrested Sarah at her office, in front of her co-workers. She's been suspended pending the outcome of the charges. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Are you really sorry? Because this seems like exactly what you wanted to happen. For the first time since I'd met him, David sounded angry. Not diplomatic, not careful, just plain angry. What I wanted was for Sarah to stop trying to steal money from me, I replied. If she'd chosen to do that on her own, she wouldn't be in jail right now. She's your daughter. Yes, she is. And I raised her better than this. Then why didn't you give her another chance? Why didn't you try to work something out before involving the police? David, how many chances was I supposed to give her? 22 years of financial support wasn't enough. $87,000 for a wedding wasn't enough. I was supposed to let her forge my signature and commit fraud against me because she's my daughter? You could have talked to her first. I did talk to her. At Romano's. I told her I was done funding her lifestyle, and she responded by trying to steal money from me. She wasn't trying to steal from you. She was trying to borrow money. Without my knowledge or consent, using forged documents. That's called theft, David. He was quiet for a moment. She's scared, Mrs. Patterson. She's sitting in a jail cell, terrified about what's going to happen to her career, her future, our marriage. She's never been in trouble with the law before. Then she shouldn't have broken the law. She made a mistake. She made a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice to commit fraud when she didn't get what she wanted through manipulation. What do you want from her? What would it take for you to drop the charges? I can't drop the charges, David. This is a criminal matter now. It's between Sarah and the state of Connecticut. But you could choose not to cooperate with the prosecution. I could, but I won't. Why not? I thought about how to explain it in a way that David might understand. Because for 22 years, I've been enabling Sarah's belief that she's entitled to other people's money. Every time she had a crisis, I fixed it with a check. Every time she made a financial mistake, I absorbed the consequences. I taught her that there would always be someone to clean up her messes. So you're doing this to teach her a lesson? I'm doing this because I finally realized that teaching her that actions have consequences is the most loving thing I can do for her, even if it destroys her life. David, Sarah is 42 years old. If her life is destroyed by the consequences of her own criminal behavior, then maybe her life needed to be rebuilt on a foundation of honesty instead of fraud and manipulation. David was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Mrs. Patterson, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have told you before. What's that? This isn't the first time Sarah has done something like this. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? She forged my signature last month to apply for a credit card in my name. She said it was just temporary, that she needed some cash flow until her next paycheck. I found out when the bank called to verify my employment. What did you do? I covered for her. I told the bank I'd authorized the application, but forgotten about it. I canceled the card before she could use it. Why didn't you tell me this when I asked if you knew about the fraud attempt on my account? Because I hoped it was a one-time thing. Because I didn't want to believe that my wife was what she is. What is she, David? Someone who thinks rules don't apply to her. Someone who believes she's entitled to whatever she wants, regardless of who gets hurt. Someone who sees other people as resources to be exploited rather than human beings to be respected. It was brutally honest, and probably the most accurate assessment of Sarah's character I'd ever heard from someone who loved her. I'm sorry, David. For what? For not setting boundaries sooner. For enabling her to become the kind of person who would commit fraud against her own mother and her own husband. Mrs. Patterson, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think she can change? Do you think there's any hope for her to learn from this and become a better person? I considered the question carefully. I think prison has a way of providing clarity about priorities. I think losing everything you thought you were entitled to can be a powerful teacher. But David, I also think that change has to come from Sarah herself. No one can force her to become a better person. What about us? What about our marriage? What about it? Do you think I should stay with her? Try to work through this? It was the kind of question a mother-in-law should probably stay out of. But David had been more honest with me in the past week than Sarah had been in 22 years. David, I think you need to decide what kind of life you want to live and what kind of person you want to be married to. If you want to be married to someone who commits fraud when she doesn't get her way, then stay. If you want to be married to someone who takes responsibility for her actions and treats other people with respect, then you might want to reconsider. She's going to need support through this, someone to believe in her. She's going to need consequences, someone who won't enable her to avoid responsibility for what she's done. You really think she should go to prison? I think she should face whatever consequences the justice system determines are appropriate for her crimes, just like anyone else would. David sighed. I keep thinking there should be something I can do to fix this. David, you can't love someone into being honest. You can't support someone into taking responsibility. Sarah has to choose to be a better person, and she has to make that choice based on her own desire to change, not because someone else is trying to save her from the consequences of her actions. That's hard to accept. It's the hardest thing about loving someone with a character problem. You have to love them enough to let them fail. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about the daughter I'd raised and the woman she'd become. I thought about the choices I'd made that had enabled her behavior and the choice I was making now to stop enabling it. It hurt. It hurt more than I'd expected it to. But for the first time in 22 years, I felt like I was being a good mother. Not a convenient mother. Not a useful mother. Not an easy mother. A good mother who loved her daughter enough to let her learn from her mistakes, even when those mistakes had serious consequences. 6 months later, Sarah pled guilty to fraud charges and was sentenced to 18 months in prison with 3 years of probation. David filed for divorce while she was awaiting sentencing. I didn't visit her in prison. I didn't write letters or put money in her commissary account or maintain the relationship that had been built on my financial support. But when she got out, when she'd served her time and completed her probation, when she was ready to build a life based on honesty instead of manipulation, I'd be ready to be her mother again. Until then, I was finally free to live my own life, with my own money, on my own terms. And it turned out that freedom was worth every penny I'd ever spent trying to buy love that should have been freely given. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.